Okay, so welcome to issue 2 of the Single Women Economy Brief. And what we're going to be talking about today is what it actually costs women to navigate the world as a single woman. Not emotionally, but economically. And what I'll be doing today is introducing a concept that I'm calling the single woman risk premium. And I'm going to explain exactly what it is, why it matters, and what it means for women and for organizations. The economy was built around the assumption that risk would be distributed across households and partnerships. Single women often carry those risks alone. And the result is a premium, okay, because you have additional costs, additional burdens, additional exposure that nobody really tends to name. And so by the end of this video, you will have a framework for understanding something that has always been true, but has never really been named clearly enough in economic terms. And so let's get into that here. So in finance, a risk premium is the additional return investors demand for taking on greater risk. And the higher the risk, the higher the premium. And so single women experience something structurally very similar, not because we are inherently risky, but because we carry risks that partnered households distribute, usually across 2 adults, and we carry them alone as single women. So the single woman risk premium is the additional financial, logistical, cognitive, time, and emotional cost that single women absorb because we operate as a one-person household. And we're doing that in an economy that's been designed for 2 people, right? And so there are 8 dimensions at the moment that I have identified. They are money, employment, housing, health, caregiving, time, retirement, and I added on entrepreneurship. So, as you know, I do these videos every Friday. I write in full about the single woman economy every Friday on Substack. So if you prefer to read, go ahead over to Substack, but this is kind of a great video version. In addition to that, if you'd like to request the full research brief that I produce every month that I share with organizations and brands so that they can use the insights and think about how they can really serve single women more effectively. If single women are part of your consumer group or a part of the talent group in your organization, then all you need to do is click the link somewhere in the description and you can request and download a copy. Okay, so one thing we have to remember as well when we're discussing the risk premium for single women is we're not talking about individual choices, because a lot of the time what happens is people think, well, you chose to be single. Now, it's true that there are some women who choose to be single, and there are some women who are single by circumstance. It may be they're widowed, maybe divorced, separated, whatever the case might be. What we are talking about when we talk about the single woman economy is systems. Okay, so systems like mortgages, insurance products, lease agreements, tax systems, pension planning, care provision. Okay, and none of those were designed for a single economic actor as the primary and permanent unit. Okay, a lot of these systems have been designed on the basis that there will be more than one person. Okay, and it's really interesting if you listen to some of the discussions sometimes I hear happening in the US at the moment. You know, there was that time where a lot of people were talking about people who are going no contact with their parents. And there were some inferences that in a system like the US's system, one of the reasons why there is some attention on, no contact relationships intergenerationally is that, well, who's going to look after an aging population? Who and what will absorb the cost if, for example, there are lots of families where there is no contact? Who will absorb the cost of aging, okay, for society? So when a single woman applies for something like a mortgage or a lease, the assessment process is usually designed to take into account 2 incomes. And actually, a lot of the time when you listen to even partnered women who go to a lot of these financial appointments, it is often assumed that their husband is the one that is the breadwinner, or the main earner or the higher earner. And so you'll hear partnered women discuss this in terms of the way financial services and financial professionals and service providers tend to deal with them. They don't even recognize often that a partnered woman could be the major economic actor. So imagine what it's like for single women who are engaging in these services. Single income is often treated as structurally insufficient by default. I mean, I'm even thinking about when I've applied for leases, the guarantee sometimes is a lot higher because they're taking into account a lot of these factors. And it isn't because single women are less credit worthy. It's because actually the model obviously was not built for a single economic actor in mind. And I will say this, obviously we focus on the single women economy, but a lot of this research, of course, applies to single adults as well, which is why the research itself is so fascinating. All right. Now, one of the reasons why the risk premium is hidden, of course, is because the invisible contract most women absorb without being explicitly taught is that the risk will eventually be shared. Okay, girls and women are raised to believe and even seek partnership. And so, even within a lot of spaces, there's still this idea that you will meet someone and you'll share the rent, for example. You will buy a home together. But actually, that isn't always happening, right? It's not always the case that a husband, a family member, or a future partner will be absorbing some of these costs. Actually, there's a lot of women who are looking ahead to a life of 20, 30, 40 years where they will be a single economic actor. So, okay, let's talk about what the research is saying and what we're seeing around this piece, okay? Obviously, although we see more single women being celebrated these days and independence now of some kind is deemed to be aspirational, and of course there's a lot of messaging around back yourself, rely on yourself. There's a lot of entrepreneurship conversation happening. Now, that is an incomplete picture when it comes to single women. All right? Because actually, you need infrastructure. And so being a business owner, for example, or leaving a typical paid employment job may not actually be the best decision to make, especially if you're thinking about some of the provisions, the benefits that come with being an actual employee, depending on where you live in the world, health benefits, etc., etc. And so although there's a very kind of dominant online narrative for women and business and going into business and escaping employment, leaving the 9 to 5, etc., achieving freedom and a freedom lifestyle, obviously entrepreneurship generally removes certain structures, okay, that may have been relied on before around healthcare, predictable income, pension contributions, paid leave. And for a lot of single women, especially aging single women, these are not optional extras. They are actually survival infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying that, of course, it's not possible via entrepreneurship to fill in some of these gaps. But actually, when we look across the demographic of single women, not all single women are in a position to do that, not least because some single women have chronic illnesses and disabilities. So see, these are some of the extra bits that we often need to take into account. Okay? And therefore, we have to accept that a lot of these narratives around women escaping the 9 to 5, for example, for single women, there is a risk calculation. Fundamentally, the risk calculation looks very different because there is no second income. There's no partner's healthcare plan to rely on. There's no household backup. Okay. So you are being penalized quite often for operating solo. And this is why there is a risk premium for single women. Okay. So I'm going to go through the 5 risk dimensions in this video, one by one. First of all, you have the income risk, okay? So one income is the entire household. If it stops, everything else stops. That's the point. And in the meantime, you still have to pay mortgage. You usually still have to pay rent. There is no backup, okay? And so there's real risk management when it comes to income. The second risk is housing. So the full cost of housing on one income can be great. Okay, mortgages can be challenging. We do know, obviously, that home ownership is very challenging in certain places around the world, and that becomes intensified if you are indeed a single woman. And I'm aware that obviously there are some stats, for example, that show that single women are amongst some of the highest homeowners, but that doesn't represent all single women when we look across the generations and social classes. The maintenance cost of a broken boiler, if you've ever owned a home, you know how that goes. Roof repair, a flooded bathroom. It falls entirely, of course, on one person and their one income. Then, of course, you've got moving costs, whether you own a home or rent a home. All right. You've got the moving costs that you need to carry by yourself. You may indeed hire professional movers, but that is, of course, an additional cost, but it often becomes quite necessary for single women if they, don't have a network which can help them move without them purchasing that service. Health risk is the third one. Okay, for a single woman, your health is not a lifestyle concern. It is an economic foundation, because if your health fails, a lot of other things which are built on that are at risk. Okay, when you cannot work, income stops. Right? Depending on your line of work, your pension contributions might be paused. Okay, but your household still needs managing. You do not have a partner that's going to cover the rest of the things. And this means that investing in your physical health and preventative care, so not running on empty, taking illness seriously, these are economic decisions. They're not just personal decisions for single women. The fourth risk is care in two directions. So when we look inwardly, if you need care as a single woman, there's often no built-in caregiver, okay? And many single women continue working through illness because stopping is not financially viable. Then, of course, if we look at many single women becoming primary caregivers for aging parents or family, or even a child that has special needs or a disability, and they're doing that without a partner's income to absorb, for example, the career interruption that might bring. The fifth risk is safety. And this is a really interesting one because actually personal safety is a financial cost for single women, right? Choosing areas to live in that are safer, choosing apartment blocks that are safer in terms of having a concierge, having security, maybe not using ride shares at nighttime, looking for areas that are more well lit to live in. These are not lifestyle preferences for a lot of single women. They are risk management expenditures, okay? Because if you're not in a partnered home, for example, you might not be sharing some of these practical and psychological responsibilities in terms of mutual safety. And so a single woman is funding and managing safety by herself. And then the last one I'll mention in this report is time risk, right? Every administrative function of a household takes time, and it all belongs to one person. So if that's household management, financial planning, healthcare admin, tax returns, insurance renewals, emergency coordination, meal planning, cleaning, none of it is shared. And so time is in fact an economic resource for a lot of single women, and single women do spend proportionately more time, of course, on infrastructure maintenance in a different way. So it's really important to realize that a lot of single women are often saving or calculating their finances based on expenses, but not risk. And that is actually a different thing. So, we need to be thinking about not what are our monthly costs, but the question is what happens if income stops, for example, for 6 months? Yeah, that is a risk question. And so we have to be thinking often about the economics differently. So what I'll do just here is just share a little bit of what our community has shared. One of the things we have is this global community. And so some of our data, of course, is qualitative. And after the first issue of the Single Women Economy Brief, we got an overflow of responses from our community. And there were individuals who shared experiences like aging out of the foster care system and how difficult that might have been for them. And now in their 30s, they're only just learning about money and a 401k. And for them, a 9 to 5 works really well because they thrive in the consistency it brings them as a single woman. So these women don't lack ambition. What they're saying is that they've correctly identified their risk profile, and consistency is their primary need, hence why employment is infrastructure. And then other comments, like in the US, it's easier to be self-employed if you have a partner who is carrying the benefits. This is really common. Sometimes women who are seeking to start their own business and they're looking up to other women in business, those women do have, to a certain extent, if they're partnered, if they're married, some kind of infrastructure. So even if they leave a job, their rent is still being paid, the mortgage is being paid. And then, of course, there was a really other interesting response, which is, I'm single, child-free, and plan my future as if I'll always need to rely on myself. I have a pension, investments, income protection, and critical illness cover. Nobody taught us these things when we were younger. So this woman has built a single woman risk portfolio. Okay, that is what she has done. You notice there, she talked about income protection, critical illness cover, investments, and pensions. And this is why you'll see that the dominant response when these studies and surveys are done is women aren't saying, I wish I had a partner necessarily. What they're saying is, I'm managing risk alone in a system that was not designed for me. And they're figuring it out. So what does this mean for single women? And then what does this mean for organizations? So first of all, you cannot manage this kind of risk on depleted resources. Being resourced is not an option. It's not optional, okay? It is infrastructure. Remember, I talk a lot about how important it is for single women to be resourced, because then you are able to deploy those resources to create infrastructure in your life that supports you. A cleaner, for example, for a lot of women is not a luxury. It is time recovery. Professional movers, if you're moving, right? This means that the physical labor often is covered when you're moving, right? Meal prep or food services. We see a lot of single women using these types of services because it makes their life easier. Quality appliances. Big fan of those, right? Quality appliances in your home that reduce time costs. A reliable coffee machine, if that's your thing, for example. Good cookware. An efficient washing machine. These are not indulgences for a lot of single women who are living alone. They are time and energy management tools, okay? And I'm evidence of that. Also, what you will find is a lot of single women invest in quality domestic infrastructure. And it's not overspending to single women because they are building what they need. They're building infrastructure in their homes according to what they need because they are not sharing that responsibility with other people, right? Income protection, critical illness insurance. These are safety nets that single women often need, okay? Maybe a strong accountant or financial advisor, so that you have the expertise who can help you manage, okay, financial complexity and help you manage and specifically plan, okay, for things like aging and retirement in a single income household. And then the last thing, of course, is intentional community. A lot of our surveying and research shows that a lot of single women are investing in intentional community. Social capital is not a lifestyle benefit. It's also a way of reducing risk as well. Okay. So we go over all of this in detail in the full PDF brief. So you can access that at the link and request and download a copy. Now, lastly, what does this mean for organizations? Because understanding single women and the reality of their lives, but understanding how they're making certain financial decisions, of course, should be of interest to organizations and brands, okay? And so, for example, if you're an employer, you should be thinking about the fact that pay equity is really important for single employees, okay? Because actually it impacts whether or not they have a financial safety net. Some employees, if they're partnered, they can absorb somewhat of a pay gap. for example, right? But actually the survival risk is a lot higher for single employees, okay? And so one of the things we do is encourage organizations to look at their benefits packages and review them through the lens of an employee who is single, because a lot of the employment benefit packages actually speak to being partnered in many, many ways. For financial services, single women and single people need products that are built for one income. They do. They also need retirement planning advice and products, right? Emergency fund products. At the moment, a lot of these products do not exist. They are in the market being like they're kind of modified when you make an application, but actually they're not often designed with the reality of the shift that is happening on a global level around single income households. The same and similar can be said for insurance, all right? And also for consumer brands. Like I said, there's a massive opportunity. A lot of single women are premium buyers. They buy high quality goods because it's becoming a necessity as well. And there's a cohort of single women, of course, who have disposable income. And so their relationship with spending is very different. But the problem that a lot of brands have, and I'll be doing a deep dive on this, is that they market to women through the lens of partnership and or mothering. And actually, not all single women are partnered, obviously, because they're single, but equally, they're not mothers either. And so if your marketing is really focused on that, with the reality of the shift, remember, we have high volumes in certain places around the world, particularly in Europe, the UK, and the US, of single women, single economic actors. And the way they relate to brands, their brand loyalty, it differs, and they also have disposable income. So that's the single woman economy brief for this week. Like I say, the full report, which comes with emerging trends and insights for organizations and brands, you can find at the link you can request and download. So it's been brilliant to talk with you this week. I'll see you next week for issue 3.